Well, good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's 2017 Anzac Day Last Post Ceremony, marking the 102nd anniversary of the landings at Gallipoli. My name's Richard Cruz, and joining us today is Major General Rick Burr, Deputy Chief of the Australian Army. On this day, 102 years ago, Australians and New Zealanders fought side by side, landing in a place far from their homeland, a place that would become known as Anzac Cove. When writing about the landing at Gallipoli, Charles Bean stated, "To Australia and New Zealand, the cost of the landing was 8,000 men, of whom at least 2,300 were killed. They were men whom their countries could ill afford to lose, but with their lives they purchased a tradition beyond all human power to appraise, and set for all time the standard of conduct for the Australian and New Zealand soldier." Though the Gallipoli campaign would end 9 months later with the evacuation, those that survived would be joined by more reinforcements to fight for another 3 years, until the guns finally fell silent on the Western Front on the 11th of November 1918. With an enduring bond forged between the two countries, Australians and New Zealanders continue to come together on Anzac Day to commemorate those who served and died in all wars, conflicts and other peacekeeping operations. As always, but particularly today, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We are honoured to acknowledge the Honourable Christopher Pyne, Minister for Defence Industry, and great-nephew of Private Patrick Pyne, whose story will be told shortly. We're also honoured to welcome Mr Kerry Stokes, Chairman of the Council of the Australian War Memorial, and Miss Christine Simpson-Stokes, Dr Brendan Nelson, Director of the Australian War Memorial, Mr Gordon Ramsay, Australian Capital Territory Minister for Veterans and Seniors, and members of the Council of the Australian War Memorial, the National President of the Naval Association of Australia, Commander Terry Makings, and Mr George Mack, National Executive. We also warmly welcome members of the ACT branch of the War Widows Guild of Australia and members of 224 Army Cadet Unit, Canberra. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. Shortly, Australia's Federation Guard will dismount the catapult party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier within the Hall of Memory. Australia's Federation Guard is a tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. It provides a ceremonial presence during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries and for civil and military events, including here at the Australian War Memorial. Historically, a catapult was a support for a coffin, but it has come to be represented by a remembrance stone or tomb. A catapult party was originally appointed to guard a coffin from theft or desecration. Now it performs a ceremonial role honouring the dead. Once the Guard members enter the commemorative area this evening, they will replicate the drill of a catapult party placed around the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to please stand and join in singing the New Zealand and Australian national anthems.
At a folk party, attention! At a folk party, present arms!
The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's first World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations over more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Private Patrick Thomas Pyne. Patrick Pyne was born on the 25th of June 1895 in Wellington, South Australia, to John and Elizabeth Pyne. He was the third of 6 sons born to the couple. He grew up in Wellington and Strathalbyn and attended Strathalbyn State School. When his father, a mounted police constable, was posted to Renmark, Pyne remained at Strathalbyn with his older brothers. When the Strathalbyn Post Office was opened in 1913, Pyne gained employment as a postal assistant. One of his older brothers, Octavius, worked as a telegraph linesman in the district. A social young man with a wide group of friends, he was well known for his bright and cheery nature and his sporting ability. He was a member of the Strathalbyn Rifle Club and reportedly a great shot. At the outbreak of the First World War, Pyne travelled to Adelaide, and on the 2nd of September 1914, he enlisted at the Morphettville Racecourse, joining the newly raised 10th Battalion. A little over a month of training followed before Pyne embarked with the 10th Battalion from Outer Harbour in Adelaide, aboard the transport ship Ascanius. After a stop at Fremantle, where several companies of the 11th Battalion were embarked, Ascanius joined the Australian Imperial Force's first convoy, which had formed up at and departed from Albany. Pyne kept a diary during this time and recorded several events, including the death and burial at sea of a comrade and a collision between Ascanius and another transport ship, Shropshire. He wrote of the event, "We were all sleeping peacefully in our hammocks when a loud crash came and the ship seemed to stagger. In a twinkling, we were in our lifebelts and up on the deck, prepared for the worst. Though both ships sustained serious damage, the worst did not occur, and the men of the 10th Battalion were able to disembark at Alexandria in Egypt in mid-December." Several months of hard training in the desert followed, but there were frequent periods of leave for the men to explore Cairo and its surrounds. In a letter to his parents, Pyne described some of the sights he had witnessed. "There are sights you see that would not be permitted in South Australia. In one part there is a place called the Wazza Bazaar. It consists of streets where all the lowest class gather." In March, the 10th Battalion and other battalions in the 3rd Brigade sailed for Lemnos in preparation for the Gallipoli campaign. In the early hours of the 25th of April 1915, the men of the 10th Battalion rowed silently towards the Turkish shore at what would become known as Anzac Cove. The war diary of the battalion records, "No sound was heard except the splash of the oars. We thought that our landing was to be effected quite unopposed, but when our boats were within about 30 yards of the beach, a rifle was fired from the hill in front of us above the beach, right in front of where we were heading for. Almost immediately, heavy rifle and machine gun fire was opened upon us. The men finished rowing to the shore and dashed for the heights above the beach. The fighting which took place inland quickly became confused, and at some point in the next 4 days, Pyne was killed. He was listed as missing in action on the 5th of May. An investigation into his fate found that he'd been killed in action sometime between the 25th and 29th of April. He was 19 years old. Pyne's remains were recovered and he was laid to rest in the Valley of Death, Shrapnel Valley, by Padre William Fighting Mac Mackenzie. By the time the Australians left Gallipoli in December, his remains had been relocated to Beach Cemetery. After the end of the war, his exact burial location could not be identified, and today a headstone in Beach Cemetery on the Gallipoli Peninsula states that Pyne is believed to be buried in this cemetery. One of his officers, Captain Eric Sexton, later wrote of Pyne, "I knew him well. He was a fine young fellow, a great shot, and the possessor of a record of which any soldier might be proud." At the conclusion of a Mass dedicated to Pyne in his hometown, Father Gurry of the Church of the Good Shepherd offered the following lines. The hero boy that dies in blooming years, in man's regret he lives, and women's tears. More sacred than in life, and lovelier far, for having perished in the front of war. The Pine family suffered further loss in March 1917, when their eldest son, Octavius, who had listed in March 1915, died of wounds suffered after being shot while laying telephone line as part of a wiring party on the Western Front. He was laid to rest in Boulogne Eastern Cemetery. He was 26 years old. Patrick's nephew, Dr. Remington Pine, continued the family tradition, serving as a medical officer in Korea after the 1953 armistice. His great-nephew is the Honourable Christopher Pine, MP and Cabinet Minister. Patrick and Octavius Pine's names are listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among more than 60,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Patrick Thomas Pine, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
And a folk party present. Arms. And a folk party, shoulder, arms.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
And a folk party
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the 2017 Anzac Day Last Post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.